Hi and welcome along. For today's review, we're actually hiding in the cottage, but this is one of the plants that I wanted to bring you and was offered to me by David Austin Roses as a possible substitute for all of you people out there really craving a colour and a rose like the Lady Emma Hamilton, which is why I'm very baffled by this next rose. And my opinions are not going to go down very well, I don't think, with an awful lot of people. But I try and bring you my honest opinions of every rose that I can. So those people that say that I love every rose, it really isn't very true at all. The rose we're going to be talking about today is actually Jayne Austin. Actually named after a family member and not the world famous author. Jayne Austin is a rose launched by David Austin Roses in 1990, which was why I'm finding this really quite baffling that this rose is still growing and still in production. I'm going to let this particular specimen speak for itself, and the likes of the Lady Emma Hamilton and the other beautiful apricot rose, Crown Princess Margareta, is now discontinued here in the UK, although they are available in other places in the world. So going back to the rose that's actually in front of me today, this is Jayne Austin, launched by David Austin Roses in 1990. It is a small shrub rose reaching around 3 feet by 3 feet, and it's marketed as being a rich apricot colour, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to completely disagree with it. There's nothing rich about the colour with this particular rose whatsoever. Actually, realistically, the rose is actually lighter in colour than, for instance, Charlotte, which was launched around 1993 off the top of my head. So a very similar colour range to Charlotte. The colour I'm not going to be describing as apricot at all. Temperatures here in the UK are very mild at the moment. They've dropped by about 12 to 15 degrees. Nighttime temperatures are plummeting down into the single figures, so very chilly. So we should be having lots of strength of colour on the roses that we're showing at the moment. That is not the case with Jayne Austin. Very light in colour, almost a heavy cream, very slight hints of apricot there, but no real depth of colour whatsoever. You can see, because the evenings have been fairly cool, that telltale red streaking, or very dark pink streaking up the outer edges of the petals. This particular plant I'm not impressed with at all, and if it persists being as it is at the moment, this is not going to stay very long in my collection of roses whatsoever. You can see that it's absolutely smothered in black spot. Very weak. Now this, I will have to be open and honest about this. This is a particularly young rose. It's only been in the ground for around 8 or 9 months. So very difficult to give you a full adaptation and a personal review of a rose that hasn't really got itself completely established. But all signs are pointing for me that this is going to be classed for myself as a gateway plant, and it's going to be susceptible to things like black spot, mold and mildew. And if it persists, I say, it will be heading to the great compost heap in the sky, and it won't be remaining as part of my collection. This particular rose actually replaced Desdemona in the garden. And yeah, not having a particularly great time of it at the moment. I say reaching around 3 feet by 3 feet. The foliage is incredibly broad, as you can see. Very high gloss and dark green in colour, but unfortunately blighted, as I say, with black spot. The blooms are something in the region of about 3 to 3.5 inches across. They're born in these small clusters of between 3, 4 and 5 blooms at a time. The plant is actually fairly upright, standing very comical in its growth. Have it very upright. It's actually taking the weather quite nicely, but you can see, I say, the foliage is quite damaged, and it's actually quite weak in its stance. It's all starting to fall apart a little bit here in my hands. But this is Jayne Austin. One redeeming feature of this particular rose is its fragrance, and again, I'm going to have to disagree with the David Austin website on this one. They're saying this has a rich hybrid tea fragrance, which for me, hopefully my nose isn't wrong, it's not doing me some disjustice, but actually the fragrance on this one is actually quite a strong mirth. So it's a very warm and woody, spicy fragrance. It really is quite warm and quite woody in its tones. It's really quite strong. If you do get your nose right in there and you can put up with, say, the blighted foliage and the weak growth, this fragrance is really good. Yes, we're talking sandalwood and cloves and all those lovely mirth tones that you get when you're talking about a warm fragrance. Very old rose in its fragrance notes. This one is going to rank something in the region of a 6 with me on the fragrance rating. So a really, really decent fragrance. But I say, if it persists with the black spot, persists with the weak stems and the bad foliage, I'm afraid Jayne Austin from David Austin Roses won't be staying in my collection for very long. And in my personal opinion, this rose is nothing like a substitute for Lady Emma Hamilton and goes absolutely nowhere near the beautiful rose that was Crown Princess Margareta, which were absolute powerhouses of fragrance, volume of flower and vigour, and colour. So unfortunately, this is a little bit of a miss as far as I'm concerned. But I have reviewed it, I have cut it and rolled it in today. But this is Jayne Austin from David Austin Roses, launched and introduced in 1990, and for some reason, probably because of its family connection and because it's named after a family member, is still being grown. But in my opinion, other roses that are much, much better have been discontinued, and this one is now still available.